Smoky Mountain Storytelling.
Sorry. Start it.
No problem. And we do this every month, the second Sunday of the month at 2:30, and then we have our business meeting right afterwards. So if you're here and not already a member, feel welcome to stay for that. But let's go ahead and get our storytelling started. We're going to start off today with Fred Goddard. He is the vice president of our group. Oh, I didn't introduce myself. I'm Jim Easton. I'm the president of the Smoky Mountain Storytellers Association. And so anyway, Fred became a member of the Smoky Mountain Storytellers Association right after moving to Tennessee in 2016. And Fred usually tells original tales or stories of his family, but today he's going to tell a true story of East Tennessee about how one person's kindness can change the course of someone's life. So Fred, tell us a story.
Thank you. Back in the early 1950s, a professor from a theological seminary out in the Great Plains somewhere had decided that he and his wife were going to take their summer vacation and spend it in the Smoky Mountains. So one morning, they went into Gatlinburg to have their breakfast. And the professor and his wife were sitting there enjoying their breakfast. And the professor was saying how wonderful it was, the peace and quiet. And he wasn't being bothered by anybody. But he noticed over in the rest of the room, there was an older gentleman in a dark suit and white shirt, no tie, going from table to table and talking to everyone. And he sort of whispered over to his wife and said, she's like, I hope he doesn't come over here. Yeah, I just want to relax. And she said, Douglas, you behave yourself now. If he comes over here, you behave. He says, all right. And sure enough, the gentleman comes over. And he smiles at them and says, well, good morning to you. You folks new? No, sir, we're here on vacation. Oh, well, where are you from? Oh, we're from Kansas. Oh, well, it's nice to have you here in Gatlinburg. What do you do in Kansas? And he says, well, I teach at a theological seminary out there. And the gentleman says, oh, you don't say. You mean to tell me that you teach preachers how to preach? Well, I got a story for you. And the gentleman goes and pulls up another chair. Meanwhile, the professor, his eyes are rolling in the back of the head going, oh my Lord, not another preacher story. But his wife sort of saw that and gave him a gentle kick underneath the table. And the gentleman sits down. He says, hey, you see that mountain out there? Well, right at the foot of that mountain, many, many years ago, a boy was born to an unwed mother. Now, he grew up and his childhood was just a horror. Because everywhere he went, some adult would come up to him and go, hey, boy, who's your daddy? And that boy would bow his head. No, sometimes he'd out and out cry. And he'd walk away and they'd laugh. Now, I don't know why people did that to that poor boy. I mean, I guess some people did it, so it made them feel better just for a second if they could forget their own shortcomings or their own troubles, or maybe they was just mean. I don't know, but I don't know why they did that. And of course, once the adults start something, you know the children, they're going to pick that up right away. So even school was a nightmare for this little boy. Who's your daddy? Who's your daddy? To the point where he didn't take part in anything. He sat by himself during lunchtime, wouldn't play outside with the other kids. Why, even on Sundays, He'd go to that little one-room, one-door church and wait outside until just as things were starting, and he'd sneak in that door and sit in the last pew. So, and he knew the service, so as soon as that preacher got up to say his benediction, he could hightail it out of that church and he wouldn't have to hear, "Who's your daddy?" Well, this one particular Sunday, there was a new preacher there. And he was different from the old one. Now, you know them old preachers. It's like they're chained to the pulpit. They never leave that pulpit for love or money. But not this new one. He was all over the place. He was up at the pulpit. He was amongst the choir, down in between the pews, during the whole service. And it got time to the benediction. And it found this new preacher standing right by the only door. And that little boy was trapped. He had to get in line with everybody else. So he had to get in line, and he came up to the preacher, and the preacher shook his hand and put his hand on his shoulder and looked around him going, "Well, boy, where's your daddy?" And half the line behind this little boy started snickering and giggled to themselves. And you heard the mumbling, we're going to find out who his daddy is now, and mumbling. Well, I don't know what it was, but that new preacher, he sensed what was going on. And I guess it was a little bit of the Holy Spirit entered that preacher, and he put his hand back on that boy's shoulder and said, "Wait a minute. I know you. I can see the family resemblance. You're a child of God, right?" And that little boy just looked up at him and smiled a little bit. And the preacher patted him on the shoulder and say, "You go ahead now, son. Now, you have a mighty important inheritance to live up to. So you go ahead and do the Lord's work this day." And that boy left. And from that time on, that boy walked proud. He had his head up. Whenever someone in town say, "Hey, boy, who's your daddy?" he'd throw his shoulders back and smile at him and go, "I'm a child of God." And the old man says to the professor, "What do you think of that story?" And the professor says, "That's a wonderful story. It has a wonderful lesson to it. Do you mind if I use that in class?" And the old man says, "Sure, you go right ahead." And he stands up and he puts the chair back and he starts to walk away and he says, "You folks have a good time. Now, glad to have you here in Tennessee." And he takes another step or two and he stops and he turns around and he says to him, "You know, if that preacher hadn't ever told me that I was a child of God, I don't think I've done a thing with myself. Y'all have a good day." And he walked away. And the professor, he now says to himself, "I gotta tell that story now." And the waitress comes over and they said to her, "See that old man who was sitting here with us? Do you know who he is?" The waitress says, "Why, sure. I know him. That's Ben Hooper. He's the governor of Tennessee." See, Ben Hooper died in the late 1950s. He was born in 1870. A time much different than our time today, and a time where things like unwed mothers and children out of wedlock were frowned upon. But thanks to that preacher, Ben must have made quite a name for himself, because in 1914, he was elected governor of Tennessee, and he was so highly thought of. There, here it is, almost 50 years later, and people still knew him on sight as the governor of Tennessee. It's not the first time I heard this story. I thought to myself, well, I'm going to try. From now on, when I think about saying something hurtful or about to tell someone where to go and how to get there, I'm going to think to myself, who's your daddy? Thank you.
Oh, that's a great story, Fred. Thank you so much for sharing that. Boy, that has made my day already. Well, I'm going to do something a little bit different. I'm the second storyteller today, and I'm going to try something just a little bit different. Some stories are told in words, and some are told in art, and some are told in music. And so I want to share a song by Michael Kelly Blanchard. And he and I have something in common. Both his father and my father gave us haircuts growing up. And for some people, that may not mean very much, but some of you will remember that if your dad grew up in the 30s and 40s, the role models were all tough guys and loners. And sometimes that could make it a little bit difficult for fathers and sons. When I was growing up, nobody hugged it out in those days. But some fathers found a loophole, and it was cutting hair. Because even tough guys could cut hair, but you can't cut hair long distance. You got to get in there close enough that you can hear somebody breathe, close enough that you can see the heartbeat in their neck. Now, my dad came by it honestly because his father had been a barber. And so he learned to cut hair growing up, although he never had any interest in doing it as a profession. He wanted to be an artist, and so that's what he did. But he never forgot how to cut hair. And I figured I had the gene as well. So when I went off to college and I didn't have any spare money for things like haircuts, I started cutting my own hair. And when you cut your own hair, you get a lot of bad haircuts. In fact, I don't know if you've ever had this experience of gapping your hair so badly that you had to get a magic marker to kind of color it in a little bit. But I did that, but eventually I got the hang of it. And I began to cut my own hair through college and divinity school and out into the first few churches that I served. And then I got lucky because I got to a church where one of the main people in the church owned a hair salon. And after I'd only been there a few weeks, he came up to me and he said, "Now, Jim, we do this for all our ministers. I have 8 stylists in the shop, and there's always somebody free. Drop by anytime you want to and get a haircut. It's always on the house." And I said, "Wow, that's really nice. Thank you so much. I actually cut my own hair." And he said, "Yeah, we know. Feel free to stop by anytime, Jim." Daddy cut my hair. He didn't care for style. He'd just snip and snip, sweep it in a pile. When I could not keep still, he would understand. Some things are just known between a boy and a man. Right there in the middle of our kitchen's cluttered floor, in the middle of the 50s, in between a couple wars, he'd get out his old scorch sheet and wrap it round my neck. And he would be so close to me, I'd smell the coffee on his breath. He would be so close to me. Well, we had a falling out, Danged if I know why, but every time I think of it, there's water in my eye. Said some awful words. He ordered me to leave. For years my sister wrote me just how hard my mother grieved. Second tour of duty, after all the thrill had gone, I started giving haircuts to my buddies there in Hom. The wire came on Friday, I was cutting JoJo's hair. We buried Mom on Wednesday, Dad was happy I was there. Buried Mom on Wednesday. He never did remarry, traveled quite a bit. As a father still was distant, but as a grandpa quite a hit. The stroke was unexpected, so much to be relearned. He gets around with just a cane, but his speech has not returned. Now, I cut Daddy's hair. He still don't care for style. I snip and snip the memories and sweep them in a pile. I don't say a word, but he smiles when I'm done. Some things are just known between a father and a son. Right here in the middle of my kitchen's cluttered floor. Now I'm in my 60s, but I feel the ache once more. For all the years that anger kept us far apart, thank God that there's forgiveness to mend a broken heart. Thank God that there's forgiveness. He'd get out his old scored sheet, wrap it round my neck, and he would be so close to me, smell the coffee on his breath. He would be so close to me. I miss you, Dad.
Very good.
So Jean's our third storyteller. Jean, you want to tell us about your story?
Yes. I was giving us a moment there. So let me, there we go. I was trying to pin myself. Let's see, there we go. Well, some of you know me, most of you know me as Jean Davidson. I grew up outside of Knoxville, Tennessee in Knox County and lived all over the Southeast for a while and then moved back to East Tennessee in 2013. And the story takes place that year that I moved back. It's a story about things that we don't always expect. Each spring of the year, the Volunteer Ministry Center in Knoxville would have a big luncheon for everyone. My sister had invited it to me years ago to sit at a table. Businesses sponsored various tables and to sit at a particular table. And I would usually plan my spring trip back to Tennessee around so I could go to this luncheon because it was a fun thing to go to. They always had nationally known authors or wonderful speakers, and it was just a wonderful event. This year, I was already in East Tennessee, and we were planning to go again. So I made my way to Knoxville and from Blount County, and made my way to Knoxville and made sure I left early enough to get into the parking garage and find a place to park, the free parking garage. And so I found a place to park and made my way down to Henley Street and crossed Henley. And then looked up, and there was the Sun Sphere, from the 1982 World's Fair, right there next to the Knoxville Convention Center. And there are a lot of steps up and a lot of steps down, and eventually made it into the center itself and looked down that long, long hallway. It's a wide hallway, and it has all kinds of wonderful art on the walls, quilts and Appalachian quilts and photographs and all kinds of things. But I wanted to make sure I made it on time, so I didn't stop and look at those things on the way in. I made my way all the way down the hall. At the end of the hall, where it turned off to the side, there was a table, a registration table, and I registered. And they told me where my table would be. I would be at table 21. And they got out the map and they showed me where my table was on the map. And I looked, and it was way at the far end of the ballroom banquet hall, up near the wall, but about 2 rows back from the front. And I went, okay, I'll remember that. And then I turned the corner, and there were all these exhibits, tables with all kinds of booths and exhibits. And they all had to do with homelessness and people experiencing homelessness. For the mission of Volunteer Ministry Center is ending and preventing homelessness. And so there were people there from, say, the McNabb Center. There were people there from Tennessee Coalition for the Homeless, Homeless Veterans Association, Salvation Army, all kinds of organizations. And so I walked around and talked to people and got some of the swag, some of the ballpoint pens and those kind of things. And I give you a little sack to put it in, and people had candy on their tables. And so you got to hear what was going on with these ministries in Knoxville. And then I looked down at my watch, and it was about 11:30. Now, the event always started right on time and ended right on time because it was designed so that people could come during their lunch hour in their work clothes. They could come during their lunch hour, sit at tables with people from their office or people from other organizations, and still do the program and get back to work. So I knew it would start right on time, and I looked down. It was about 20 after 11. I thought, well, it's time to start moving in. And I moved into the banquet hall, and there was this, it's a huge space. It was full of tables, round tables with the white tablecloths and the little centerpieces and the glassware and the real plates and the forks and knives and spoons. It's a beautiful venue. It was all set up, all ready for us. There were already desserts at the places. And so you sort of want to scarf out which dessert you wanted and where you could sit and see. There's not a bad place in the seat, not a bad seat in the place. I came in, the Suzuki youth were playing their violins. It was wonderful music. And I walked over to the edge and found table 21 and found a chair where I could easily see the front. You could always see from everywhere because there was a huge big screen that showed everything that was going on. And I looked around, and there weren't too many other people in there yet. Sort of the kind of crowd that comes at the last minute, apparently. And so I put down my pocketbook and I put down my swag next to a seat, and I looked around the table, and all the decorations, and there was the brown envelope at the center of the table where you could put a pledge card later on. Knew what that was for, and waiting for the other folks to show up. And along the walls, I looked back, along the walls behind me were lined up the wait staff. They were all dressed in black aprons. And one of the women came over. She was a small woman, about my age. She came over and asked what I wanted to drink, if I wanted water or tea. And she filled up my water glass. And I said, "How are you?" And she said, "Well, I'm doing all right." And she said, I really appreciate being able to work this event, this lunch. I really appreciate Volunteer Ministry Center and what they do for those who are experiencing homelessness. She said, a lot of the wait staff are homeless. You wouldn't know it, but a lot of them are. She said, you see that boy over there, that blonde boy? I looked over there and there was a young man with blonde hair, tall, all dressed as wait staff. And she said, he's homeless right now. He just got out of the Army and he doesn't have any place to live. So we really appreciate what they're doing. I'm so thankful that I'm not homeless. I have a place to live and I have food to eat and I can pay my utility bills. It's not much and I have a job to do. Yeah, it's tough at times. It can be tough. I mean, I've worked 8 straight days right now and I work for 5 different temp agencies in order to be able to make ends meet. But I have work and I have a place to live. Sometimes I worry about working that much that I might get sick. I can't afford to get sick. I don't have any insurance. A few years ago, the temp agencies got together and they figured out a way to get us all insurance for $47 a month. That was great. And then the Affordable Care Act came along and well, Tennessee opted out of it so far. I'm not sure what I'm going to do. I definitely can't afford to get sick. What? Yeah. You said some of the pastors are going to go talk to the legislators about that. I hope it works. I hope it works. It would really be good to have insurance. It really would. I would like to not have to be sick, and I certainly don't want to end up homeless. I wasn't always this close. It wasn't always this hard. My husband and I, we both had good jobs. We made a good living. We had a place to live. It was wonderful. And then he died. He died and he left a lot of debt. And I had to find someplace else to live, me and my daughter. I'm proud of my daughter. My daughter is about to graduate from college. And that is a wonderful thing. I nearly graduated from college. I came from within 3 months of graduating from college. But someone started stalking me. And back in those days, there wasn't anything you could do about it. Nobody would believe you. Nobody would believe it was a problem. All you could do was to hide, was to get away. And so I dropped out. 3 months to go. I dropped out and disappeared. I sure wish I had that degree now. It sure would make a difference to be able to graduate from college. But I'm thankful. I have a place to live. I have work to do. And she looked back over at the young man with the blonde hair. He's homeless. I went out and talked to those people at the booth, the ones about veterans, homeless veterans organization. And you know what they're going to do? They're going to find him a place to live. They've got him temporary housing for a few days. And then he wants to go back into the Army and they're going to make it work for him. Because when he's in the Army, he's going to have a place to live. He's going to have work to do and he's going to have food to eat. They're good folks, aren't they? They're really good folks. Just about then, we started hearing people come into the banquet hall, to the ballroom, and chairs scraping and people talking. And she looked up and went, "Oh, I wasn't supposed to talk. I'm not supposed to talk to the guest." please don't tell anybody. I just went on and on. I shouldn't have said anything. She was horrified. I said, no, it's okay. I spoke to you first. Thank you. It's a privilege to hear your story, and to get to know someone. And she hurried off to fill the rest of the water glasses, and then she brought our salads, and we sat and we listened. We finished, we talked to each other and got to know the people sitting at the table a little bit. And then the program started, and there was the big screen, and they showed what was going on in Volunteer Ministry Center. We heard about somebody who was not homeless, who had been, and then Sue Monk Kidd, the author that I wanted to hear, who wrote Secret Life of Bees, one of many authors I had heard there before, like Rick Bragg and Kathy Izzard. She was there. She's the one I'd come to hear. And she got up and she spoke about creativity and imagination, and how she came up with ideas for her books and her stories. It was powerful. And they gave out a couple of awards for volunteers and for staff members. And there was more music from the Suzuki Choir. And we finished our meals, and they pulled the brown envelope off the table. So if we wanted to give, we could put it in the envelope. We had our desserts, and it was time to go. And it was 1 o'clock when they promised. We finished our meal, and people started to leave, and it had been good. It'd been a good event. I made my way back out through the exhibits that were now closing up, and back down that long hall, pausing this time to look at a few pieces of art, and back across Henley Street, back to the Sun Sphere, up to the garage. And it was as I was crossing Henley that it occurred to me. I had come to this event to be inspired by this work of ministry that was going on, to be inspired by this famous author, Sue Monk Kidd, to hear good stories, to meet some people and to talk to friends. But you know what? Do you know what moved me the most? It was something totally unexpected. It was that conversation with the woman in the waitstaff. It was hearing her story that touched my heart and moved me. It's amazing how the unexpected things in life show up and move you and change your heart. And that's my story, the unexpected lunch, and the unexpected story I heard at that lunch.
Thank you so much, Jean.